What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be continuing our in-depth training course of the extraction and post-production process. We cover everything from the science, processing techniques, SOPs, essentially everything you will need to know from A to Z on cannabis extraction, refinement, synthesis, and theoretical understanding. From beginner to novice, we will go all the way through. Got quite a bit to cover today, guys. Without any further ado, let us go ahead and dive right on in to the content. Yes, well, welcome back, friends, brothers and sisters of the cannabis industry. Well, I say brothers and sisters, but in all reality, I see the YouTube metrics. 99.9% of you are male, so welcome back, brothers. The introduction to solvent-based extraction. We are doing chapter 2. We're here now into the meat and potatoes. Botanical extraction is a fascinating process used widely to create some of the modern products used daily. From medicine to cleaning agents, powerful botanical compounds can be extracted from a wide variety of plants and used to make a plethora of useful products. You see here we have the trichome under high microscopic magnification. Love those mushrooms, that's what we're after. Currently, there are several popularized methods of botanical extraction in today's extraction landscape, all of which have their own use cases and unique benefits. Most botanical extraction methods can be categorized into two different methodologies, either solvent-based extraction or solventless-based extraction. In some cases, target compounds can be concentrated from biomass material using solventless-based extraction techniques centered around mechanical separation methods, including ice water extraction. Don't worry, there's a whole course on that coming up. Dry sifting, also a whole course, and rosin pressing. You know how we do. All of these will be covered in depth in future courses. These methods of extraction are limited in their utility and typically only apply to plants that contain their target compounds within glandular trichomes. Conversely, solvent-based botanical extraction methods utilize organic solvents to dissolve target compounds from botanical biomass to form a solution. Solvent-based extraction methods have a wider array of applicable uses and allow for a greater versatility in an application when it comes to extraction. In this course, we will focus on the two most prominent and applicable forms of solvent-based extraction, both hydrocarbon extraction and ethanol extraction. These are the two solvents you're going to mainly run into when using cannabis. We will have a whole course on CO2, but it is relatively archaic at this point. While both methods are highly efficient in extracting botanical compounds, both have their own benefits and drawbacks. When it comes to determining the suitable form of solvent-based extraction for a specific process, it comes down to determining which solvent is the most compatible with the target compound's polarity and boiling points, along with which process fits the tolerance for potential hazard. This section will explore the basics of how solvent-based botanical extraction works and highlight the factors in determining which solvent is best for a specific application. Let's talk about polarity, polar versus nonpolar solvents or compounds. In the world of solvents, like dissolves like. So a like solvent dissolves a like compound. Polarity versus nonpolarity. A solvent's polarity dictates a solvent's capability to dissolve a target compound from biomass material. Generally, polar solvents can dissolve polar compounds, and nonpolar solvents can dissolve nonpolar compounds. When choosing an extraction solvent, it must be compatible with the target compound's polarity to dissolve them from the botanical plant matter to form the solution, that sweet golden honey oil that we all know and love. Here's the distinction between a polar compound and a non-polar compound. We're going to get into the taters of the science right here. Solvent-based extractions rely on the principle of solubility in order to extract the target compounds from botanical biomass. Solubility refers to a compound's ability to be dissolved by a solvent forming a solution. A solution is defined as a homogeneous mixture of two or more substances. The solvent is the major part of the solution in the botanical extraction. The substance dissolved in the solvent is referred to as the solute. It's the minor part of the solution. When a solution has dissolved all, it can no longer dissolve any more solvent. It is called or considered a saturated solution. The compound's solubility and saturation capacity within a solvent can be altered by increasing or decreasing the temperature of the solvent and or the solution. However, the solubility of a compound within a solvent is ultimately determined by its polarity. Here you see two famous LPG compounds that are used every day in extraction. Namely, I want you to take a look at the hydrocarbon chain, which is just the carbon atoms surrounded by hydrogen atoms. The longer the hydrocarbon chain, we talked about that in the previous course, right? So I'm not going to reiterate things we already talked about, but here's where you get into why. A substance's polarity is determined by the distribution of electron density across the molecular structure of that compound. Compounds that have an even spread of electrons, like butane and propane, are nonpolar. Compounds with an unevenly shared electron density, like water, are classified as polar compounds. Polar compounds are defined as having both a positive and a negatively charged end. The polarity of the solvent will determine the compounds it can dissolve. While some compounds can be more polar or nonpolar than others, generally like dissolves like. Polar solvents will dissolve polar compounds, and nonpolar solvents will dissolve nonpolar compounds. We can calculate a compound's polarity based on its electronegativity. Electronegativity measures how strongly an atom is attracted to an electron it bonds with. The higher this number, the more an atom of that element will be attracted to the electrons in a bond. So, for a simple case in point, this is the same concept that's deployed all throughout organic chemistry, right? So let's say that we're doing liquid extraction. Well, we have a nonpolar solvent that we use to dissolve our nonpolar compounds, namely the trichomes and cannabinoids inside of the plant material, or when we made. So those are going to take the cannabinoids. We didn't start with trichomes, let's say, in a CBD synthesis, a CBD conversion, CBD to delta 9 conversion. Okay, well, a lot of the compounds, the cannabinoids that we're dissolving inside of our nonpolar solution, let's take heptane, for example, will relatively stay inside of that. So whenever we use something to quench the catalyst used in the conversion process, namely aluminum chloride, hydrochloric acid, trisulbutyl aluminum, let's call it sodium bicarbonate. These are more polar compounds. Now, because the polarity is more attracted to a polar solvent, like dissolves like, then when we begin to wash with water, all of those undesirables that are not cannabinoids will tend to gravitate towards the polar solvent, being water. And because water is polar and the solvent that we used for extraction is nonpolar, these two will separate. You understand how liquid extraction works? Same kind of situation here. So in diagram A, let me see if I can pull, I should have made a little laser pointer here, but in diagram A, we have what's called a nonpolar covalent bond. Bonding electrons shared equally between two atoms. There are no charges on the atoms. And then in diagram B, we have a polar covalent bond, okay? Bonding electrons shared unequally between two atoms, partial charges on the atoms. And then in diagram C, we have an ionic bond, which is a complete transfer of one or more valence electrons, full charges on the resulting ions. Let's see. Generally, if the compound has an electronegativity, it is classified as a nonpolar covalent bond. If the compound's electronegativity is between 0.4 and 1.8, it is considered a polar covalent bond. And if the electronegativity is greater than 1.8, it is considered an ionic bond, which is nonpolar. While polarity is typically binary, meaning it is either polar or nonpolar, there are some instances where a compound has both polar and nonpolar properties, like in the case of ethanol. Ethanol's polarity is unique. While its electronegativity classifies it as polar, due to its structure, ethanol has a hydrotropic polar head, water-loving, that can bind to water-soluble polar compounds, and a nonpolar tail that can dissolve hydrophobic or oil-soluble nonpolar compounds that are typically found within botanical biomass. When a compound has both polar and nonpolar properties, it is classified as amphiphilic, meaning that it has both hydrophilic and hydrophobic properties, taking water, rejecting water. And here's ethanol's molecule. Ethanol's amphiphilic nature can be beneficial when making a full spectrum extract containing all of the different compounds found within the botanical biomass. However, it can make the processes of botanical extract refinement more challenging. Guess why? Well, fats and lipids, when trying to make a highly concentrated botanical extract of a certain compound. While a solvent's polarity plays a major role in its ability to dissolve both desirable and undesirable compounds from botanical biomass, the solubility and saturation capacity of a solvent can be altered to some extent by adjusting the temperature of the solvent prior to extraction. Generally, both the solubility and saturation capacity of a solvent increases or decreases along with its temperature. The colder the solvent is, the lower the saturation curve, right? But also the more prevalent it is to reject some of those polar soluble materials, chlorophyll, fats and lipids, so on and so forth. As the temperature of a solution increases, typically its solubility and the saturation capacity increases in tandem. When the temperature of a solvent is decreased, the solubility and saturation capacity also decreases. In botanical extraction, it is quite common for the solvent to be chilled prior to extraction to alter its selectivity and limit the co-extraction of undesirable compounds. Namely, the only thing that we don't want is green color and fats and lipids. Now, this applies to the entire chemical spectrum, organic chemical spectrum. However, focusing on cannabis extraction, what is the one thing that we don't want in our oil? Well, essentially anything that is not a cannabinoid, right? We want full purity cannabinoids, the closer to 90 plus percentile as possible. This is where we make our temperature selection, our solvent selection, so on and so forth, depending on the desired final outcome. Chilling solvent prior to extraction reduces both the solubility target compounds and undesirable plant waxes and chlorophyll. While this is somewhat counterintuitive, chilled can create a higher purity botanical extract. While the temperature of a solvent plays a role in the solubility and saturation capacity of target compounds within a solvent, ultimately a compound's solubility within a solvent is predominantly determined by its polarity. So polarity being the most important when determining selectivity, and then finally temperature variation comes into play as well to either decrease or increase both the solubility and the saturation of the either desirable or undesirable compounds that we would like to remove into our carrier solvent so that we may concentrate them later, namely to turn them into something that we can smoke, right? Okay. When it comes to botanical extraction, compatibility between a solvent's polarity and the target compound's polarity is essential in extracting the target compounds from botanical biomass. While polarity is quite possibly the most important factor in extracting the target compounds, the solvent's boiling point in relation to that of the target compounds will determine the viability of recovering that solvent from the botanical extract solution. Pause. So this is just a basic way of saying if our solvent that we are using to extract our solute is similar in boiling points, then it's difficult to separate the two from each other once we have completed the extraction because both of them will boil out together. Here you have the difference between evaporation and boiling. Water pressure, atmospheric pressure. Water pressure is less than the atmospheric pressure. Bubbles cannot form and things just evaporate from the top. Vapor pressure is equal to atmospheric pressure, then bubbles can form and rise. A compound's boiling point is defined as the temperature at which a vapor pressure of a liquid equals the atmospheric pressure of the surrounding liquid and phase changes from a liquid to a vapor, observed as boiling. When it comes to a solvent-based extraction, the solvent's boiling point in relation to the target compound's boiling point will determine the viability of recovering said solvent from the botanical extract without evaporating the target compounds. Essentially, a lot of this is moot. It's just the understanding of the chemistry behind selecting what we're doing and understanding why we're doing, right? We are Wisdom, Knowledge, and Understanding Consulting LLC. So this is the understanding behind it. In most cases, you generally will not worry about this too much, namely in cannabis extraction, because our cannabinoid boiling points are extremely higher than basically every solvent that we would ever use to extract or co-extract desired and undesired compounds with. A solvent with a lower boiling point than that of the target compounds is ideal to evaporate the solvent from the botanical extraction solution effectively. Ideally, there should be a significant difference between the solvent's boiling point and the target compound's boiling point so that the solvent can be easily evaporated from the solution without co-evaporating the target compounds. For instance, if the target compound is cannabidiol, most extraction solvents have boiling points that are well below the boiling points of cannabidiol, making them easily recoverable from the botanical extract with limited degradation of the target compound, making them considerable candidates. However, higher boiling point solvents like ethanol would be not strong candidates if the target compounds are highly volatile. For example, terpenes, right? Lower boiling point, higher boiling point solvent, lower boiling point compound. You run the risk of co-evaporation. In this case, recovering the high boiling point solvent from the extract would result in the volatilization or conversion of the target terpenes, making them impossible to separate the two through distillation. In this case, a nonpolar solvent with a lower boiling point like butane or propane would be a better candidate to extract lower boiling point terpenes. So the TLDR version is, if you're targeting terpenes, use something with an extremely low boiling point. Butane, propane, another LPG gas. If you're namely specifically going after terpenes, then ethanol is not going to really be your first solvent of choice. Cannabinoids, pretty much everything's on the table. When choosing the right solvent to extract target compounds, the extraction solvent should have a lower boiling point with a great enough difference between the extraction solvent and the target compound's boiling point, especially under vacuum. This will allow the solvent to be easily recovered from the extract without co-evaporating the target compounds in order for it to be considered a viable method of extraction. Once a solvent has been determined to be compatible with the target compound's polarity and boiling points, the final key factor in determining the overall viability of a solvent-based extraction method for application is its potential hazard. Inherent risks of the extraction method must also be considered, the appropriate fire safety measures required, the overall suitability of the facility, and potential zoning and or licensing restrictions to determine if an extraction is viable for the application. So, in order of importance, right? What do we have the capability to achieve as far as regulation and safety requirements? Number two, how can we select a solvent that has replicable polarity between the target compound and the solvent that we're using to extract with? And number three, is there any chance of degrading the target compound based on the boiling point of the solvent that we use to extract? 1, 2, 3. Okay. When performing a solvent-based extraction, safety should always be the number one concern. Typically, most solvents used for botanical extraction present some inherent risk due to their flammability and volatility. Although one solvent may be a prime candidate to extract target compounds, the level of hazard or fire safety requirements may disqualify the method based on the criteria. While some extraction methods pose more inherent risks than others, with the right equipment, solvent-based extractions can be performed with very little risk posed to the operator or the surrounding area. When performing a solvent-based extraction with flammable and volatile solvents, the best way to mitigate risk is to perform solvent-based extraction methods with an appropriately rated hazardous location. And if you haven't watched the safety video and you skipped ahead to this one, go back and watch that one first, because that is covered in depth in a previous course. Utilizing highly flammable solvents under extreme temperatures and pressures can be dangerous. To safely and compliantly perform most forms of solvent-based extraction, it must be done in an appropriately rated hazardous location with all of the proper PPE. Hazardous locations are areas where the possibility of fire or explosion may exist under normal or abnormal conditions because of the presence of flammable, combustible, or ignitable gases, vapors, liquids, dusts, or fibers. These areas are classified solely for the purpose of ensuring the safe and proper specification and installation of electrical or electronic equipment. Using an appropriately rated extraction booth or fume hood greatly reduces the risks of working with volatile solvents. Here you have a Class 1 Division 1. I'm just going to skim through a lot of this because you should be watching the safety video first, and all of that is there. Here you have your lower explosive limit, and here you have your actual hydrocarbon extraction. Now, go do your safety research first. You shouldn't be assembling this without understanding that, but I'm not going to waste your time going through it twice. Here's an LPG system, commonly known as a closed-loop extraction system. You can find different variations of them all over the planet. Hydrocarbon extraction is an incredibly versatile method of botanical extraction, my favorite when just extracting raw cannabis. Hydrocarbon extractions like butane and propane are praised for their relatively high yield and low cost. Hydrocarbons are a classification of organic compounds composed of hydrogen and carbon. These highly volatile compounds are valued for their low boiling points, making them easily recovered from most botanical extracts. Both butane and propane are nonpolar, making them a great candidate to extract nonpolar botanical compounds. Butane and propane are gaseous at room temperature, and ambient pressure becomes liquid when pressure is increased or temperature is reduced. Using liquid hydrocarbon solvent to saturate biomass, material can dissolve nonpolar compounds and extract them from the plant material. Due to propane and butane's lower boiling points, they lend themselves to preserving the highly volatile compounds like terpenes, resulting in a more aromatic and flavorful botanical extract. Hydrocarbon extraction is an excellent option for creating high-quality extracts with decent throughput and relatively low startup cost in comparison to the level of equipment needed to create an ethanol-extracted concentrate of a similar potency. Although there are many benefits to hydrocarbon extraction, the main drawback of hydrocarbon extraction is the solvent's high volatility. Hydrocarbons are highly combustible, requiring careful safety measures, including operation within a C1D1 extraction booth. Due to hydrocarbons' high volatility, this extraction method may not be permitted by local municipalities. Be sure to consult with your local fire marshal to determine the viability of this method for zoning and licensing. Now, I really like the first one. Hydrocarbon is an excellent option for creating high-quality extracts with a relatively low startup cost. Now, there are some machines, I'm not going to plug any specific businesses right here, but there are some modular extraction machines that'll run you upwards $350. But doesn't really do anything different from, somewhere, another company that you could source locally up there in Kent, Washington, for example, where you could, if you had a little bit of know-how, and even if you didn't, the people out there are great, then you could put together a relatively viable industrial capacity hydrocarbon extraction system for 30 grand, 30 grand to get your entire business off the run. This used to be unfathomable, not even close to being feasible to be able to have a budget like, let's say 150 grand and put together an entire extraction laboratory, start cranking products out the door to get you some money. That is a relatively low investment. With ethanol extraction, you're going to need multiple pieces of equipment. We're going to talk about that right here. Ethanol extraction is an excellent method of botanical extraction, valued for its high throughput potential and reduced flammability compared to more volatile solvent-based extraction methods like hydrocarbon extraction. Ethanol is classified as an alcohol made from starch-based plant materials through a complex fermentation and distillation process. Ethanol, commonly known as ethyl alcohol or grain alcohol, is a colorless, flammable liquid with an incredible number of uses beyond botanical extraction, including fuel and cleaning agent. Let's just take a small 10-second coffee break here. Okay, back on. Not the greatest fuel. They started adding it to our gas, but it's not the greatest fuel, actually. Its combustibility and the carbon residue that it leaves behind is really quite terrible modern engines figured it out, I suppose, but, they tried to fake it anyway. Let me not get off on a tangent. As an extraction solvent, ethanol is unique due to its amphiphilic nature, meaning it has both polar and nonpolar properties. Ethanol has a hydrotropic polar head, water-loving, and can bind to water-soluble compounds, and a nonpolar tail that can dissolve hydrophobic or oil-soluble compounds typically found in botanical biomass. As the plant matter is saturated with ethanol, it dissolves both the polar and the nonpolar compounds from the biomass material, extracting them both. Ethanol's amphiphilic nature can be ideal when seeking to create a more full spectrum product, but it can be less than ideal for those looking to create a more concentrated extract. RSO, for example, extreme medicinal benefits. This is proven. You cannot advocate against this at all anymore, right? Ethanol would be the solvent of choice. 95.99% THC vape pen gets you higher than a kite, or at least systematically trick you into getting higher than a kite, because your body can only, metabolize so much THC anyway. But anyway, that's for a whole different video. Then butane propane would be the point. Let's say that you want a really, really, really potent and flavorful compound. Then maybe propane would be switched from butane, right? Just depending on the product, right? We talked about the solvent selection. Due to ethanol's polar and nonpolar nature, it has increased propensity to extract undesirable plant waxes and chlorophyll during the extraction process. Basically all crude oil from ethanol is going to be brown. This typically results in a less potent and pure end product, requiring more post-processing to reach the same purity level than that of nonpolar solvent like butane or propane. While ethanol's selectivity for undesirable plant waxes and chlorophyll can be altered to some extent by chilling the ethanol prior to extraction, reducing the solubility of the undesirable plant waxes and color pigments, it also reduces the solubility of target compounds. So what am I saying right here? Well, let's say that you've taken the temperature to a point where I hear this all the time. I don't have to winterize. I don't need to winterize because I get my ethanol down to negative 60 degrees Celsius before I extract. Yeah, okay, that's fair. But subsequently, in decreasing the solubility of undesirable plant waxes and color pigments, you've also reduced the solubility of your target compound, which means that there's probably a good amount of cannabinoids still left in the ethanol, right? Still left in the biomass that you were not able to extract over into the solvent, right? The saturation curve is going to drastically decrease while simultaneously decreasing the saturation curve of the undesirable plant waxes. Very difficult to decrease the solubility of undesirable plant products while keeping the solubility of target compounds. So we're going to get into the intricacies in the manufacturing using ethanol probably in one course after this. After the next one, we're going to start with LPG hydrocarbons and then go into ethanol and get into the actual how-to and the mechanisms behind it. But that just needs to be posted, and said out loud. The colder you get, the more that you reduce your ability to concentrate the target compound, i.e., let's say THC, CBD, whatever that is, inside of the solvent. So that can be problematic because that means I'm wasting a lot of time, electricity, processing power, so on and so forth on biomass that is essentially being wasted. I cannot just continue to extract the biomass over and over and over again, and I've basically destroyed the throughput capability of my ethanol processing facility, right? So I need to find a happy medium between how much work am I willing to do post-processing and winterization and isolation versus how much am I willing to lose as far as saturation in the target compound solubility based on the solvent of my choice, ethanol, for example. Somewhere around negative 30 degrees Celsius, negative 20 degrees Celsius is kind of like a happy medium where you can get the best of both worlds. Are you going to get a way higher concentration of cannabinoids using hot ethanol? Sure are, but you need to have a way more intensive post-production process. Anyway, so on and so forth. Are you going to have a way less concentration of undesirable compounds in freezing your ethanol solvent down to negative 1 million degrees Celsius? Yes, but you're also going to have a very poor final yield in all of the work that you just put in. And if you're going to do all of that, and your main focus is coming to an end product, which is going to be a vape pen or something like that anyway, then you've selected the wrong solvent for the path that you've chosen and the product that you've chosen to make. Here's a glossary. I'm just going to skip over it so that you can look. 1, 2, 3, like count to 3. That way you could take a screenshot and go back through and watch any, if you don't know what any of these words mean, this is what they mean. Awesome. We'll see you in the next course here. Thank you for watching. Whichever video you are watching here, you can be sure to go back and check out the playlist of the other videos that are listed in sequential order from beginner to advanced. And if you're watching on YouTube, you're watching this a week behind everyone else. The students in the Discord actually get these lessons a week earlier every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I highly encourage you to go check that out, because you will also be able to ask any questions or concerns that you may have during the lesson there. If you enjoyed this video, I have no doubt that you will enjoy one of these popping up over my shoulders. Guys, it has been a blessing, a privilege, nay, an honor to be able to teach and consult you. I will see you in the next lesson. Peace out.